In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade talk around the league. Several trade rumors from Frank Silvervalley of DailyFaceoff.com. Is the Boston Bruins the ideal landing spot for Canucks captain Bo Horvat? Will the Philadelphia Flyers make several moves as reported they are wide open for business? And could Meier end up in Washington? We also have news from the NHL waiver wire, some injury updates, players heading back to junior after the World Junior Championships, and the Tampa Bay coach Jon Cooper has called out his team. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we've already been NHL news and some trade talk to take a look at here today. First up, we do have news from the NHL waiver wire. The Washington Capitals have placed forward Joe Snively on waivers. He's appeared in 6 games this year and recorded 1 assist. They certainly have some veteran key players coming back to need to make room on the roster. This weekend they are supposed to be getting back Nicholas Backstrom and Tom Wilson. So that's good news. Absolutely huge boost for the Washington team, who have already been playing relatively well here as of late. They just had a pretty good road winning streak together. This team looked early on in the season like they were maybe falling back and might be in danger of missing the playoffs this year, but they've turned things around. Things have been going well for the Capitals, and this is only going to help them likely get better. And they're also rumored to likely at this point be in contention to be buyers at the deadline, which we're going to talk about here, potential trade talk later in the video. So look for Washington to be aggressive as they obviously want to continue this hot streak going. So that's the news from the NHL waiver wire. Some big returns there. The Vegas Golden Knights are getting a boost as well. They're supposed to be getting back Jonathan Marchessault and Alec Martinez. Both those players are potential inserts into the lineup returning to Vegas after both being out for a period of time. So that's another big boost to them. Vegas has also returned young prospect forward Zach Dean and Jacob Brabanek, both who are participated for their countries in the World Junior Championships, have both been returned back to their respective junior clubs in the CHL. Obviously, lots of trade activity happening as well in Canadian Major Junior Hockey right now. We're getting closer to their trade deadline. Still some big names from the tournament like Shane Wright expected to get moved. So stay tuned. There could be some big news in that regard regarding some of those top junior players getting a chance to play for league championships and possibly make it to the Memorial Cup, obviously, which is another big showdown and top showcase for junior players where they have a chance to be the Canadian national champions. Now, as I mentioned, the Tampa coach, Jon Cooper, has called out his team. Now, the team's not having a terrible season by any means. They sit relatively comfortable in 3rd spot in the Atlantic behind the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have 49 points. I said pretty well comfortable. I mean, they're not in danger right now of missing the playoffs. But if they go on a losing streak that happens to continue, and if it reaches 5, 6, 7 games or anything of that nature, teams like Buffalo and Ottawa are certainly pushing, and the Florida Panthers are going to keep pushing too to try to catch up to them. Right now, they have a 10-point lead. If any of those other teams, as I mentioned, they're not that far off from qualifying in the wild card spot, but they have a big gap to close before they can get up into the top 3 in their division. Right now, teams like Ottawa, I think they're 7 out of a playoff spot, and teams like Buffalo, Florida, they're around like 5, 6 points. So it's kind of closing up. We've seen the teams in those wild card spots lose some games lately. Those teams have been doing more winning than losing, and it's kind of tightening up. So those teams have a shot at playoffs, but it wouldn't likely be to the top 3 in their division as long as Tampa doesn't go on an extended streak. But certainly their game against the Jets the other night, Cooper was not happy with his team, called them out for their lack of discipline, and saying it was totally embarrassing what they did. He said essentially the Winnipeg Jets were smart. They sat back, waited for Tampa to screw up, and they did. And they took advantage of it until completely embarrassed the Lightning, at least in the viewpoint of Coach Jon Cooper. So personally, I honestly think that this is a wake-up call for the Lightning, and they're not in any kind of serious danger. But you don't see coaches calling out their teams so harshly in the public all that often. Of course, he's been there a long time, knows a lot of those players extremely well, many of which he not only coached at the NHL, but even before that in the AHL. And certainly, I'm sure he has the relationship that he doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff in Tampa. But certainly, be interesting to see how they respond. Some veteran teams like the Lightning, like the Avalanche, facing a lot of adversity this year, and certainly not quite as high in the standings as we're used to seeing them in the past. Be interesting to see how things go, how they respond, and if they can respond to these words and get back on track. They've only lost a few in a row. It's not, spiraling out of control yet. But I think he wanted to, get his point across here in the media before things do. So we'll see. The Lightning, I think, will be an interesting team to watch in the second half. But like I said, they're not in real danger. Just interesting to hear those coaching remarks. Of course, Coach John Tortorella in Philly also had some interesting remarks when it comes to asked about the All-Star game. Of course, the Flyers right now have Kevin Hayes going to the All-Star game. And he said he actually doesn't give a shit about the All-Star game, and it means nothing to him. So, I know a lot of people are not fond of the All-Star game. It's just very interesting to hear an actual NHL coach say that publicly. Not something you hear very often. We shouldn't be surprised, though, with Tortorella being as outspoken as he is. Now, as I mentioned, staying with Philly, Frank Seravalli's reporting, and this shouldn't be any surprise, that the Flyers are expected to be wide open for business, with several players likely being on the move, or potentially, of course, if they can find the right deals. But they have a bunch of players that are either on expiring contracts or even some with term that they certainly want to change their mix and certainly change things up. I think it's getting to the point in the season they're low enough in the standings that they might want to sell off some assets and kind of be a little bit more in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes for first overall at the 2023 draft. Now, they're certainly going to be within the bottom 10 teams that will be eligible to win the lottery. I don't think there's any danger of that. But certainly if they go a little bit lower in the standings, it'll increase their odds and give them a better chance. So it's well known that they're looking to move players, not only like JVR, who's on an expiring deal, guys like Justin Braun, but some guys with some term on their contract, like a Kevin Hayes. They're wide open to trading Kevin Hayes. It's going to be complicated to do. I don't really know that they're going to find a deal given the amount of money left on that contract. A buyout in the summer is possible, but could be expensive. So not sure how they're going to handle that scenario. I've heard Travis Konechny's name out there as well in different rumors from different insiders. I'm not convinced they trade Konechny. I think they see Konechny as one of the players who sticks around regardless of what direction this team goes in. I know it's likely going through a rebuild, but whether how deep and how long of a rebuild, it's hard to say. But I don't know that Konechny goes. I think he sticks around, maybe even becomes one of the next, possibly the next captain, and he'll help see them through that. We'll see. But other names to watch as well that you might not have thought of before would even include Tony DeAngelo. I'm not sure the dad experiments, worked extremely well. They've had their frustrations there too, and I think they'd be open to moving him for the right price too. So certainly expect the Philadelphia Flyers to be extremely active as we get closer to the deadline. There's no doubt they're going to be sellers. It's just a matter of how many players from their roster ends up getting moved. Now, as I mentioned, Timo Meier, according to Frank Seravalli, might be a great fit with the Washington Capitals. There's many people that think that there's a good chance that the Sharks will trade Meier before the deadline. Of course, the Sharks are well out of a playoff spot. They really need to recoup future assets to take this team deeper into a rebuild. And he also has a $10 million qualifying offer, which is going to be very difficult and probably doesn't make sense for the Sharks to have. Now, I'm not sure that anybody is going to want to sign him for $10 million. So there's a good chance he doesn't get a qualifying offer and becomes a UFA. So it could be that rare circumstance that we see as a restricted free agent traded for a rental purpose. That's not something you see very often. It's usually pending UFAs, not pending RFAs. So certainly a player like that could be used in that scenario. Washington, they can try to negotiate with them, see if they can come to terms on a long-term deal, maybe at 8.5, something that makes a little bit more sense. And then see if they can get him signed. Certainly the Capitals are going to want to go for it here. Seravalli's rationale is that Washington certainly, under the Ovechkin era, want to try to win another Stanley Cup. They've had a slow start to the year, but have really picked it up. Feel like they might be able to have a chance to win with this group. Backstrom's coming back. He said he knows the hip's not going to be 100%, but certainly willing to give it everything he's got. Tom Wilson's coming back. He's still good Ovechkin. This year and next year might be this group's last shot. I do wonder if from a cap and money perspective, if they would want to move Anthony Mantha to make this work. The Sharks might take him on as a chance to maybe try to, rehabilitate that player as well, give him a bigger role in their lineup as well. But Mantha would certainly, whether it goes to San Jose or somewhere else, I can see being a player that Washington would want to move to free up the cap space that they need to bring in a player like Timo Meier. Now, what kind of return package would the Sharks be looking for? Certainly a futures-based package. I think Washington would probably have to include their first-round pick and a prospect or two. I'm not sure exactly what prospects San Jose would want. I don't know if Washington has the prospects to intrigue San Jose enough to do this kind of deal. Certainly They will not be the only team in the mix here, so it might be challenging for them to pull it off. Like I said, I do think from a cap perspective, they're expected to have John Carlson. He might be out until the playoffs. It's possible he may miss the regular season. So the rest of it, which will create some LTIR room, it's going to be difficult and tricky. But Timo Meier to Washington, according to Sarah Valley, makes a ton of sense and very well might be something that we see. And he also says that the ideal landing spot for Canucks captain Bo Horvat is in Boston. And I've talked about this before, and I do totally agree that it would be a great fit. The only concern would be is, does Boston have the assets to make Vancouver happy to pull off a trade? And I think they do. I'm just not sure that Boston is going to want to give up those particular assets. Now, you have to factor in that they could include their first-round pick this year, and I know that they're hoping that they pick last because I know they're arguably the top team in the NHL all season, so they're certainly hoping to win the Stanley Cup, and if they do, they're picking 32nd in the first round. They probably don't care if they have that pick, to be honest, especially if they win. Okay, so that's one asset. You get a top prospect like Fabian Lysell, who was highly regarded, but certainly coming off a very disappointing World Junior Championship, but had a good performance in American Hockey League in Providence. I wonder if they'd be willing to part with him or not. I'm not sure how they feel about his progress so far. And I know that Boston likely would have interest in a right defenseman like Brandon Carlo. Now, I'm not sure Boston would want to make that move going into the playoffs and deplete their blue line a bit. Certainly, they have some great guys playing ahead of Carlo, like McAvoy and Lindholm. Of course, Grizzlick's there. They do have a pretty solid blue line, but would they want to go into the playoffs minus a big right shot defenseman? I don't know that that's something they'd want to do, so it might be tricky, but at the same time, I can see there being interest, of course, on Vancouver's side, and it really boils down to how hard of a bargain they can drive. But certainly, it makes a lot of sense for a now and future perspective. Of course, the Bruins have a bunch of pending UFAs like Bergeron and Krejci. Will they return? It's difficult to say. They could certainly maybe move on from one of them. Maybe let's say Krejci doesn't come back. Horvat could easily be that top six center of the future. If Bergeron keeps playing, you got Bergeron, Horvat, 1-2 down the middle. It's when the time comes for Bergeron to pack it in. You still have Horvat. You can start looking for the next replacement that's jump up and to work with him in the top two center spots as well. So it kind of helps for the future, and it also helps really bump them up to what they're capable of here now. So it'll be interesting to see if the Horvat to the Bruins gains legs and traction, because it does make a lot of sense. I think the Bruins do have the assets. I just don't know that they're going to want to tinker that much with their lineup, because from a cap perspective, they need to create some space. But Vancouver could retain salary too. That also could play a role. So if you think about the Bo Horvat contract, he's not making a ton of money now. It's what he's going to make next year and beyond. That's the concern. But Boston will have a ton of flexibility with the amount of expiring contracts they have. So there is a lot of sense there. Is Boston really Horvat's ideal landing spot? I know the Canucks don't really have any love lost for the Boston Bruins dating back to their 2011 Stanley Cup battle. Of course, they lost that battle and the Bruins won the Cup. And the rivalry kind of has calmed down now, but still, I'm sure for a lot of Canucks fans, older fans especially, that have watched this team for a long time, that might sting seeing them go to the Bruins. But at the same time, it does make a lot of sense. Let me know if you think it can happen and what kind of package would be required from Boston to pull it off. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe. Stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.